Hello everyone. You are in the studio of InStyle Gazania. Today we will knit this voluminous double-sided SNUD with knot stitches. It consists of two patterns. Along the edge, there's one large braid. The main pattern here is Polish or ribbed elastic. Both patterns, on one side and the other, look the same. Therefore, it will be very easy to wear. Additionally, it is very voluminous, and the yarn is quite thick. That is why we will knit it very quickly. The length of this SNUD is about 130 centimeters, and the width is about 20 centimeters. This is a very detailed masterclass. I will tell you how to make the braid, how to create the crossing, how to knit the Polish elastic, and at the end of our knitting, I will definitely show how we will sew this SNUD with a practically invisible stitch. So friends, let's get started with knitting. I used YarnArt Super Merino yarn. It has 25% wool and 75% acrylic for 100 grams. I knitted 300 meters, but I knitted with 4 yarns, so I had 75 meters for 100 grams. I took size 9 needles, but we will also need a second set of needles to seam at the end. I have a short cable with a total length of about 40 centimeters, including the needles. We will also need a crochet hook of the same size as the needles. I use size 9. I also took a smaller crochet hook. We will need it to transfer our cast-on stitches to the needle, 2 markers. I have 1 round marker for the needle, and the second is to mark the front side of the SNUD. That is, the side where we will make the braid crossing. Next, we need a needle for the braid crossing. A row counter is not essential. Also, an additional yarn of the same thickness as the main yarn. She will have 3 layers. Also, a measuring tape, a calculator, and a notebook with a pen for calculations. First, we knit a sample. We wash it, dry it, and calculate our knitting density. I knitted a sample with Polish ribbing, and also knitted a braid. We can combine it all into one sample and determine our knitting density for this pattern and the braid. How to do all of this in detail, I explain in my lesson. The link is above. Go ahead, watch and calculate how many stitches you have in 1 centimeter and how many rows. Here are my calculations. I knitted a sample with Polish ribbing and knitted a sample of the braid. I will say right away that I did not calculate the height of the pattern. I do not need it essentially, because I will be knitting the cowl in height. We will cast on the required number of stitches for the width of the cowl, and then knit it in height. Therefore, how many rows there are in 1 centimeter is not so important to me. I just calculated the width. I have 1 whole 64 stitches in 1 centimeter. This is in Polish ribbing. In 1 centimeter, there are 2 stitches. This is in the braid. Here, I have schematically shown what my cowl will consist of. It will consist of 1 braid on 1 edge and Polish ribbing. I decided that the width of the cowl would be about 20 centimeters. And based on the sample, I knitted the braid sample. I cast on 12 stitches, just the number of stitches in 1 braid, and I got 6 centimeters. That is, the braid will take up 6 centimeters. But I need the cowl to be 20 centimeters wide. 20 minus 6 equals 14 centimeters of Polish ribbing. How many stitches will there be here? We simply multiply the number of centimeters of Polish ribbing by our density. It results in 23 stitches. 12 stitches for the braid, plus 23 stitches for the Polish ribbing, total 35 stitches. So, to achieve a cowl with a width of 20 centimeters, I need to cast on 35 stitches. These 35 stitches include the edge stitches. Because when I knitted the Polish ribbing, I also worked the edge stitches here. So, the 35 stitches we will cast on consist of 2 edge stitches, 21 stitches of Polish ribbing, and 12 stitches of 1 braid. That's it. We can start knitting, casting on 35 stitches. We take a size 9 hook, the same size as the needles with which we will knit the cowl, and an additional yarn. the same thickness as our main yarn now. With the additional yarn, we will cast on the initial number of stitches to have an open starting row. And at the end of the knitting, after we finish the cowl, we will be able to sew the two sides with an invisible seam so that we have open stitches. According to my calculations, I need to cast on 35 chain stitches plus 1 stitch for securing. We cast on 35 chain stitches and 1 stitch, 36 in total, to secure. Here is our chain and we pull through the yarn. The length of this chain of mine is approximately 28 to 29 centimeters. I took a smaller size 4 hook, and with the main yarn in 4 strands, we start casting on our first row. Here our braid from the back side. We have such loops here, by picking them up. We pull our main yarn through and make these stitches. We pull the stitches a bit larger, so that our large needles with which we will knit the cowl can fit into these stitches. The hook must be one-sided. There should not be a hook here so that it is easy for us to transfer these stitches onto the needles. We take size 9 needles and immediately transfer the stitches onto the needles we will be knitting with. We cast on all 35 stitches this way onto the needles and are now ready to knit the first row. The first and all subsequent odd rows will be knit with knit stitches, and specifically from this side, we will do the crossover of the braid. Therefore, at the beginning of all odd rows, I will have the braid. The braid will be on only one side. So, we knit the first row, slip the first edge stitch onto the right needle, and then knit 12 stitches in a 1 by 1 ribbing. 1 knit, 1 purl. I knit with regular grandmother's stitches, and it's more convenient for me to work into the back loops here. 1 knit, 1 purl, 12 stitches, that's it. I have knitted 12 stitches in 1 by 1 ribbing plus a 13th stitch as the edge stitch. Next, I place a marker so that my braid is separated from the main fabric, and then we begin to knit in Polish or textured ribbing. I will have 5 repeats in width of the Polish ribbing, plus 1 stitch from the 6th repeat. I will knit it to create a small indentation between the braid and the start of the Polish ribbing. So this knit stitch that I'm about to work on, you can skip and immediately start knitting what I will knit next. That is, this knit stitch I will work in the front loop as a knit. You can skip knitting. Now the first repeat begins. So, we knit a purl. In this case I will knit a purl in the back loop. Next, we will knit purls in the front loop. I usually knit purls in the traditional way. After that, we knit 3 knit stitches. The first knit is worked in the front loop. The second knit is worked in the back loop. The third knit is worked again in the front loop. That's the whole repeat, 4 stitches, and then we repeat the same, purl in the back loop in this row. Next, knit in the front loop. The second knit in the back loop, and the third knit again in the front loop. So in one repeat, we have 4 stitches. We keep going like this until the end of the row. The last edge stitch we knit as usual in the traditional way and move on to the second row. In the second row, first we have Polish ribbing, then the braid. So, let's start knitting the second row. We slip the edge stitch, then knit 1 knit stitch in the front loop. After that, we repeat what we knitted in the previous row. We knit a purl stitch already in the front loop. Next, we will knit purls only in the front loops and 3 knit stitches. First in the front loop, the next in the back, and the third again in the front. And we repeat exactly the same. 1 purl in the front loop, then 3 knits in the front loop, in the back, and in the front. We have knit 2 repeats. So, in the second row, we shifted our pattern a bit to the side. Since at the beginning we knitted 1 front stitch, we always knit it at the start of the second row. Therefore, at the end of our second row, we seem to be missing 1 repeat. We will knit 1 purl, 1 front stitch through the front loop, and 1 front stitch through the back loop. This is how the second row will end. If you did not add that 1 front stitch in the first row, if you added it like I did, then I will completely finish this repeat to the end. In general, I will write down the repeat for the first and second rows. This is so you have a reference. If you did not add that 1 stitch that I added in the first row, then you will just knit according to the description. If you also add 1 front stitch like I did, to create a dip here between the 2 patterns, then knit along with me. Now we move on to knitting, ribbing 1 by 1. We simply knit the front stitch through the back loop, and the purl through the front. We knit using grandmother's stitches. 12 stitches of ribbing, here at the end of the row. The purl stitch is mine. I also knit the last edge stitch as a purl grandmother's stitch. We turn the work and move on to the third row. We will knit the third row the same way we knitted the first row, meaning we will just alternate knitting the first and second rows now. However, our purls will be through the front loop everywhere. But we need to remember that we still have a crossing in the braid. Therefore, we will need to count the rows. Let's knit the third row. We will make the first crossing here. The crossings will occur every 5 rows. That is, in every 6th row, there will be 2 types of crossings. Now, I have simply knitted 2 rows straight. At the end of our cowl, I will knit 3 rows straight. Therefore, now in the third row, we will make the first crossing. This is our front side, the third row, which is odd. Here we can mark this side with a marker. This is necessary so we know from which side to make the crossing, if we happen to lose count a bit. So, we slip the first stitch. The first crossover is done as follows. We transfer 4 stitches to a spare needle and place it in front of the work. This is where our braid goes up to the marker. Next, we knit 4 stitches in a 1 by 1 rib. After this, we need to knit 4 stitches from the spare needle. We can transfer them to the left needle, but I usually try to knit them directly from that needle. Here we had a purl stitch last, and here we have the first knit stitch. This means that our ribbing is not disrupted. Knit, purl, knit, purl. Now we knit 4 more stitches of our braid in a 1 by 1 rib. Here is a purl. The last one was, so now knit, purl. This means our pattern is intact. Knit, purl. That's it. We have completed the first crossover right here. Next, we have Polish ribbing. We are on the third row, and that row is odd. I knit the same as in the first odd row. But I always have one extra stitch in the first row. I knit it as a knit stitch always at the beginning of the row. Then I begin to knit the repeat of the first row, purl through the front loop, and 3 knit stitches. Right away, you can see the middle knit stitch. 3 knit stitches, 1 through the front, the second through the back, and the third through the front loop. That's it. We continue knitting the Polish ribbing to the end of the row, repeating these repeats and the last edge stitch. We knit the purl as usual. That's it. I have repeated my repeat 5 times of 4 stitches, and I move on to the 4th row. The 4th row is even, so we knit it the same as we knitted the 2nd row. So, after our crossover in the 3rd row, yes, now we need to knit 5 more rows straight. We alternate the 1st and 2nd rows. And in the 6th row, we will make the 2nd crossover again, so we knit the 4th row the same as the 2nd. Here we start with the Polish ribbing. Therefore, we slip the edge stitch and knit 1 knit stitch through the front loop. After this, we repeat everything again, purl through the front loop, and 3 knits through the front, the back, and the front loops. We continue to knit this until the end of our Polish ribbing. At the end of the row of Polish ribbing, yes, if you did not add that extra stitch in the first row, then you should have the following: 1 purl, 1 knit through the front loop, and 1 knit through the back loop, and 1 knit through the back loop. Your pattern will conclude. But since I added 1 extra stitch in the first row, it completely closes my repeat. I knit it as a knit through the front loop. We have finished our Polish ribbing. Now we need to knit our braid. The braid is simply knit 1 by 1, 1 knit, 1 purl. We knit using the grandmother's method. I also knit the edge stitch as a purl using the grandmother's method. We have finished the 4th row. We move on to the 5th row, which is odd knit. Here's our front side. We knit just like we did in the first row. First, here we have the braid. We simply knit it 1 by 1. Finished with ribbing, we transition to the Polish ribbing. We knit the 5th row as the first, but I had an extra stitch at the beginning of the first row. I knit it as a knit, and now we begin to knit the repeat of the first row. 1 purl and 3 knits. In total, I should have 5 such repetitions. The last stitch we knit as a purl using the grandmother's method as usual. We will knit the 6th row just like we knitted the 2nd. I will not show it again. After our crossing in the 3rd row, we must knit 5 rows. We have already connected the 4th and 5th rows. We still need to connect 3 more rows. That is, up to the 8th row inclusive, we are knitting by alternating the 2nd and 1st rows. In the 9th row, we will have the 2nd crossing. We have knitted 8 rows. Now we will knit the 9th row. So, first we have the braid. Watch how we make the crossing. We slip the first edge stitch. Next, we knit 4 stitches in ribbing. Knit, purl, here. After that, we move the next 4 stitches to a spare needle and leave them behind. We knit the last 4 stitches in ribbing 1 by 1. According to the pattern, 1 knit, 1 purl, knit and purl. And now we need to knit these 4 stitches in ribbing as well. You can move them to the left needle, but I always try to knit them directly from this spare needle. Here we had a purl stitch. So here we have a knit stitch. We knit the knit, purl, knit and purl. We've knitted, and now we move on to the main pattern of polish ribbing. Let's move the marker. This is our 9th odd row, so we knit it just like we knitted the first row. Yes, but in the first row, I have one extra knit stitch. I knit it as a knit, and then start to work on the first row. Purl and 3 knits. And we keep repeating. Purl through the front leg, knit through the front leg, knit through the front leg. I think, as we continue knitting this pattern, you'll easily find your way. Here, seeing this line of knit stitches, we knit this stitch as a knit through the back. The stitches on the sides, we knit as knits through the front leg. And one stitch before these 3, we knit as a purl through the front leg. Everything is simple here. Let's finish our 9th row. At the end of the row, we have a purl stitch as always. We move to the 10th row. And we have completed 2 crossovers, yes. After knitting 5 rows straight between them, we need to knit 5 rows again after the second crossover and do the first crossover again. So this is our 10th row. We will knit it the same way as the second, since it is even, and thus, from the 10th to the 14th row, we will knit straight, alternating between the second and first rows. I have knitted 14 rows, which means 5 rows after our second crossover. In the 15th row, we need to do a crossover again. The same as we did in the 3rd row, that is, our first crossover. I will probably write out the entire repeat for the height of the cowl. We do not count the first 2 rows. Starting from the 3rd row and going to the 14th row, we will repeat this until we achieve the desired height of the cowl. In the version that I'm writing for you, only in even rows, we start with a knit stitch at the beginning of our polish ribbing. In my version, I have 1 knit stitch at the beginning of each row before knitting the polish ribbing, both in even and odd rows. So knit as you like. If you want to follow me, then repeat after me. This means there is a little more space here between the twist and the polish ribbing. Also from the reverse side, there is at least a little space here. If this 1 knit stitch is not added in the first row, then this braid will be right next to the twist. I'm inserting the repeat for the height from the 3rd to the 14th row. Next, we just repeat this until we achieve the desired height. Well, I have finished the cowl. The total length is about 130 centimeters, and the width, as we calculated at the beginning of the video, is about 20 centimeters. After I finished, I washed it. After washing, I measured the length again, and it increased, meaning the cowl stretched a bit by about 3 centimeters. Therefore, consider that there might be some changes after washing, although the sample I washed at the beginning of the knitting did not change at all because it was small. However, on a larger piece, it stretched in length, so the total length of the cowl is 130 to 133 centimeters. This means I knitted 243 rows. Look, I did the second crossover, and after that I knitted 3 more rows. At the beginning of the knitting we knitted 2 rows straight, and did the first crossover. That is, here are 2 rows straight, and then we knitted 3 rows to ensure there were 5 rows between the crossovers, although I probably should have knitted 2 rows straight to have 4 rows. 2 here and 2 here, and the 5th row would be self-seaming. It would be. That is, when we will sew the cowl now, we will have an additional row. We will imitate knitting our stitches. Therefore, at the end of the knitting, it would probably be right to knit 2 rows, not 3, so that we already sewed, and the seam would be the 5th row. But I intentionally did it so that my yarn was right here, and we started the seaming precisely with the 1x1 ribbing, because it is a bit easier to sew than this polish ribbing. And to show you, to make it easier for you to understand, I do want to first sew the 1x1 ribbing, and then the polish ribbing. If I had knitted 2 rows here instead of 3, my yarn would have been right here, and I would have had to start with the polish ribbing. You can do the same for yourself if you watch how I will sew the 1x1 ribbing and the polish ribbing now. So here, our yarn comes out, we leave a long end and cut it. But I don't know what length to leave. About 3 to 4 widths of our cowl. That's it, thread it into the needle. Now we need to unravel our starting cast on row and transfer it to the needles, to the second needles. So we take needles of the same size, about like when knitting. Here we have 9. And I don't have a second 9, I took an 8. We transfer all stitches to these needles. We just unravel this braid and catch the main stitches, the yarn. That's it. I removed the extra yarn and transferred everything to the second needles. Now we fold our cowl exactly in half so that it doesn't twist. Yes, and we lay it out like this. Well, that is, we prepare for seaming. So, since our edge stitch is here at the beginning, and we have half as many as our rows. So, here at the end, we simply unravel the last edge stitch. We will bring the yarn here to us, and now we will start sewing, edge stitch. Here my yarn is out to my edge stitch. So, now I move from left to right. As if I am coming out of this edge stitch and removing it from the first needle, then this is our edge stitch. We also come out of it like this, moving from left to right. And also remove it, then we return to our first edge stitch that is closer to us. Moving from right to left, here we have, so to speak, a border loop. Now, our thread has come out, and we will start stitching the elastic one on one. That is, our large braid, which I will explain in a way that is easier for me. I think it will be easier for you too. Here we have a knit stitch. So we will be stitching the knit stitch with the knit stitch from that row. Next, the purl with the purl. That means we will be stitching according to the stitches, using the thread approximately to sew in such a way that we get exactly this kind of stitch. So that the transition is not noticeable, making it unclear where our seam is. Therefore, look, we are stitching 2 knit stitches, this one and that one. This is how I remembered it. The knit stitch and the entry into it from above. Here's the entry into the braid, yes. And the exit is the opposite, like this. So, to stitch a knit stitch, we need to exit. Thus, exit from the stitch moving from bottom to top. Maybe it will be easier for someone that way too. From bottom to top and drop this. The stitch, that is, it should turn like this. Just as all the knit stitches go, we will look for the knit stitch on that needle. It immediately goes again to the next one. There was crossing here, so it's not very clear. Overall, this side is not very clear since we picked up the stitches on an additional thread. And there the stitches are arranged a bit differently. Therefore, there we will knit 2 stitches together. Now you will all understand. Here we took off the knit stitch, and now we need to knit the knit stitch from this side. But on this side, we will knit 2 stitches together to form our stitches. Here we have a knit stitch, and we find the first 2 stitches. If we connect them, it will be a knit. Thus, we knit moving from right to left through these 2 loops and remove them from the second needle. Here we have formed a knit stitch, and now we need to return to this knit stitch from where we came out. Here it is, and by the way, you don't have to let go of it if you find it hard to locate. Here it is, we knitted there with a movement from right to left, picked up 2 stitches, and are returning to this knit stitch from top to bottom. It's like we're entering the knit stitch. This way, we have seamlessly sewn it. 2 knit stitches, next we have 2 purl stitches. To sew them together, I always turn to the other side of the knitting to make it easier for myself. I think it will be easier for you too. Here, we turn to the other side. The yarn is coming out here, and it's closer to this side. It comes out from this side, which means we need to do one action. So, wherever the yarn comes out, we need to make 1 stitch there. Here is our next stitch. It is a knit stitch. To come out of this braid, we need to do a movement from bottom to top like this. From bottom to top, and we remove this stitch from the needle. You see how our knit stitch turned around immediately. To continue this braid further, we look for knit stitches on this side. Where our second needle is closer to us, on this side, we can slightly unravel the yarn here and check what we knitted earlier. Look, here is a stitch, and this is the first stitch on the needle. We need to knit 2 together here with a movement from right to left. Like this, so that they join to make another knit stitch. See, we formed what looks like a knit stitch, and we need to return to the top knit stitch with a movement from top to bottom. So already entering the knit stitch, you see, we have formed a knit stitch. We turn back to our starting side. It turns out we knitted 2 purl stitches together, just from the back side. Next, we will repeat all the same actions. Our braid is sewn. Now the marker can be removed, and we proceed to sew our polish ribbing directly. Here, I placed it this way. Look, this is our last knitted measurement, and this is our cast-on row. Here on the knitted row, we will also knit 2 stitches together to form the stitch we need, either a front or a back stitch. And here we simply pick 1 stitch at a time, just as usual. Just as we did here, but there is a special feature here. Look, here our pattern always has a front stitch, and here there is a depression. Here it is always a back stitch. That depression forms this braid on the reverse side. Here, on the front side, it is this braid. Here it is always a back stitch. So with these stitches, everything is clear. If we need to knit this stitch with this one, we will knit them as front stitches. If we need to knit this stitch with that one, we will knit them as back stitches. The whole question revolves around these 2 side stitches. They are located to the right and left of our braid. The pattern shows that it alternates between back stitches and front stitches. This creates such a relief. The entire question, the interesting question, will be in these 2 stitches. Here we will knit a bit differently. Look, we will be guided by this braid. Yes, we will knit the stitches on the left and right in a special way. Furthermore, this back stitch is always here, and we knit this one as a front stitch. Yes, always. But again, this is the one. This stitch is the same as this one, that is, it follows after this in the pattern. Our braid should have appeared, yes, but our pattern just ended. This stitch is the same as this one. If we encounter stitches like these, which are before and after the braid, these two, how will we knit them? If you've noticed, when knitting 2 stitches together, we perform 4 actions. And always where the yarn comes out. At this moment, my yarn is coming out here. Yes, closer to me. So, if it comes out here, then on this side, I will have 1 action first. Then, I will move to the other side. I will do the 2nd and 3rd actions and return here. The 4th action, well, that is back here to this side. Therefore, the thread comes out to me. This means I need to perform 1 action on this side. Since this is an interesting loop, like this one, the one that is on the left, and the one that is on the right, we will sew them similarly. So look, in 4 actions we will insert the needle from below, below, above, above. This makes it easier to remember. And doesn't really matter how our loops are positioned, because especially with the cast on edge we can transfer each stitch to the needle in different ways. We can turn it to different sides, I mean. And I had already sewn this stitch earlier, and now have returned it back to the needles. Perhaps I also turned the stitch the wrong way, so don't mind if something seems off. It is not turned the right way. I will show the essence of the process, and you'll be able to turn them correctly. So, we will sew the stitches in 4 actions. The first action is a movement from below to above. Here's our stitch from below to above. We remove them from the needle, then we proceed. On this side, we again need to remove from below to above. We look for where our thread comes out. Through which stitch have we already sewn? This stitch. And the second action is again from below to above. We go through it. We have already sewn through, so it is removed. The second action is again from below to above. The third action is now from above to below. This stitch, which is first on the needle, goes from above to below. We remove it from the needle, we return here. Here is where we originally performed the first action. And again, we are now performing the 4th action from above to below. We pull all the threads. Here we have sewn these 2 together. The stitches next are purl stitches. Here on the reverse side is the analysis. This line goes here. The purl stitch needs to be sewn with this purl stitch. We turn to the reverse side and will sew them as knits. So, the thread came out here, which means we perform 1 action here, sewing them as knits. First, we rotate our stitch with a movement from the bottom to the top. Next, we move to this side from the top to the bottom and from the bottom to the top. Here is where it will connect. These 2 stitches will form a braid. And we return to the first stitch with a movement already from the top to the bottom. We need to check that the braid lies nicely and correctly, so we've done it. We now transition to our knit side, as I say. We pull the threads tight. So, we have sewn 2 purl stitches. Now we have the next interesting stitch. Yes, which is sewn a little differently. Just like we sewed at the start, by the way. The first 2 stitches we sewed in that same interesting way. Yes, this is the knit stitch that I added. If you did not add a knit stitch near our braid, then possibly you will have the purl stitch sewn with another purl stitch at the beginning. So, as we sewed, from the bottom to the top, from the top, from the bottom. We are moving to this side to find this stitch. Here it is again from the bottom. Then we go into this stitch from the top and slide it off the needle. We return here again from the top. Look here. Let me show you. If your stitches are different, well, if the walls, yes, face the other way, look at what we did on this side. Here we have 2 stitches. Here is one and the second. We need to make the seam in such a way that there will be a kind of transverse thread, looking like a pearl, do you see? That is, we first inserted the needle this way, then like this, so that it looks precisely like that. So that our seam appears as a transverse thread. And these 2 loops came out like this. And we return again from the top down. Here we had it from top to bottom. Here is the 4th action from top to bottom. We sewed everything. Next we have the knit stitches. We do not turn the fabric. We simply start to sew the knit stitches. We sew the first action from bottom to top. Here we have unfolded it, and from this side we see through which stitch we have already sewn. Here it is from top to bottom, and you see, and from bottom to top. They will connect, and our braid will be formed. And we return again from top to bottom. Our whole braid is going nicely. So we sewed the knit stitches correctly, and that's all. Next we will repeat the same thing. Next, we have the next stitch. This is the one we sew from the bottom to top. From top, just like at the very beginning of sewing the Polish cuff. So I won't show it now. That is, we will repeat exactly the same thing I showed before. That's it, our knit stitch has come together. Next, we have more stitches here that we sew in a special way. Here is 1 stitch, and here we only have the edge stitch. So, since the thread came out here, I will insert it from bottom to top. I move to this side. Again, this stitch from bottom to top, again as usual. And then already from top to bottom into the edge stitch. And I return back here. We also sewed from top to bottom. And now we are left with, here is the translation. We have a thread out. Here we insert the needle into this edge stitch. We remove the needles. We just need to connect here to this edge stitch. Thus, we will have a loop like this. So, how are we going to sew the edge stitch? I kind of came out of the lower edge stitch moving from right to left, and now I need to find the upper edge stitch. Here it is, and I will probably also move from right to left, but we'll pick up both these walls, and moving from top to bottom, we'll return to the lower edge stitch. In general, we sew this way so that we form such an edge loop. It will tighten here to create a nice edge. That's it. So, friends, we sewed our seam like this. Still, some moments are noticeable here, but particularly in the recesses. Overall it looks fine. And here's how it looks from the wrong side. Well, there is no right or wrong side, but this is the reverse side since we started sewing from the cable side. This is how our front side looked. All we have left is to hide the ends. Thank you, friends, for watching this video. I hope you all succeed. If you have any questions, write in the comments. I wish you easy stitches, and we will meet very soon in my next masterclass. Goodbye.